Tonight, we are so proud to kick off Women's History Month with contemporary women of color making history. A panel presented by We Ceremony in collaboration with the library. We are honored to learn from these women who are changing Boston and beyond. We Ceremony is a visual platform that uses storytelling to share and celebrate the unique voices of women of color. The founders of We, Iliana Panameño and Mu-Chieh Yun, are breaking barriers by creating a community of fearless, innovative, and beautiful women of color.
Thank you. Thank you, Maria, for the introduction. Since she already spoke a little bit about what We Ceremony is, I won't go so much into detail, but Iliana and I started We Ceremony in 2015 out of necessity for a more accurate and positive representation for women of color. I'm Taiwanese, and she's from El Salvador. And as you all know, Boston is one of the most segregated cities in the US, and we really needed a space for women of color. And so what better way than to come together with one of my best friends to create a community that's digital but also physical so that all women of color can come together. We'd also like to express our gratitude to the Friends of the Cambridge Public Library. Thank you so much for sponsoring tonight's event. And most of all, thank you all for coming. It's always really humbling to see people who are interested in coming to our events because, it's just the both of us and we're behind our computer screen. So it's really nice to see all of your faces. And I think to just kick off tonight's event, when we think about history and women's history, it's often centered around a very white identity. And while we certainly honor the women of color who have paved the way for us, we're very excited to celebrate 3 local women who are making history, but more importantly, they're making their mark on today and in the future. And I think right now we live in an incredible time where we are actually witnessing history being made, and you can take that in any direction you want. But I know tonight it's for the better, and we're just so pleased to offer you a small glimpse into history in the making by 3 really wonderful and inspiring women of color. All right, we'll get started with the first question. I'm sure all of you, hopefully you've done your homework and read everyone's bio on our Eventbrite page, but if you haven't, you're in luck because our first question is if you can just tell us a little bit about yourself, who are you, what you do, and what's a fun fact that people should know about you. Anyone can start.
Hello everyone, thank you for coming out. My name is Sonia and I am the co-founder of the Massachusetts Recreational Consumer Council, and I am also the co-founder of EatMe.land. So both of these kind of entities, ideas are focused very much on the newly legalized plant, the marijuana plant, of Massachusetts. So weed recently got legalized in Massachusetts, December 15, 2016. And on that day, we were given the right to grow up to 6 plants per person, 12 plants per household, possess up to an ounce in public, and 10 ounces at home. This is very, very important to me because it's not just the legalization of a drug. It's the legalization of a plant that's been illegal since the 1930s for very inaccurate, misinformed reasons. And a lot of people have gone to jail for this plant. And now that it's finally legal, it is very important and it is crucial that we create opportunities for those that have been most harmed by the war on drugs. That means people that have been arrested, people that have had any sort of contact, have had to have any sort of contact with law enforcement, just for simply being a certain type of person. So that's my main focus right now, and what is very important are the current public policy debates that just happened. That will determine our regulations, our industry, what we'll be able to do, what we'll be able to have as far as, retail stores and delivery systems, social consumption sites. And with this comes the ability to have lower barrier to entry licenses so that you don't necessarily have to have access to a brick and mortar, but you have access to this industry. So that's my main focus and goal right now, making sure that it's not just white men making money from a plant that has put so many people in jail. So I'm happy to be here with all of you. Thank you. Oh, fun fact. Let's see. Fun fact is I love to make music. And prior to my work as a weed activist, I was a musician. And I kind of gave up that world for a little bit just to put my power and energy into this focus.
Hey folks, hi, my name is Chrysanthemum. I'm a Vietnamese American trans woman. I'm a poet, performer, and teaching artist based in Rhode Island, although I'm originally from Oklahoma. And yes, I said Oklahoma, not Yoko Ono, not Yokohama. There are in fact people who look like me who come from the South. So I'm someone who thinks that poetry is more than just decorative words on a page. Has anyone ever read Audre Lorde's Poetry is Not a Luxury? Yeah. So thank you, folks in the front. If you haven't, Google it. Google's my best friend. And Audre Lorde believes that poetry is not just ornamental. It, when it deployed specifically, can be a political act of warfare. That when people who were not allowed to use language and speak and have their words recognized or even taught to read or write, when we combat that legacy and create words that subvert wider narratives, we are doing something about pushing what can history remember, what can history humanize, who can history humanize, and whose words can we deem valid. I'm a teaching artist for local poets of color in Rhode Island. I work primarily with queer and trans youth of color, and honestly, I'm blown away by the fact that young people today have so much to say about the world that they live in. And I think that is what poetry can offer. Poetry is just one way of engaging theory to practice, or praxis, that when youth are allowed to understand who they are within a confined space, when we're able to facilitate the means for them to interrogate their own identities, their own histories, and their own families' histories, they're able to say something really amazing about the world that they live in. And more than ever, especially with all the funding that's being cut from youth arts programs across the country, more than ever, I find it very urgent for a youth to really be listened to. Fun fact, I'm a Virgo. I'm a Leo Virgo cusp. August 24th?
August 23rd. Love it. It's great. Hi everyone, my name is Amma Marfo, and I am a speaker and facilitator for a company called Fun Enterprises that's based in Stoughton, which means I spend a lot of time talking to college students and the professionals that work with them, occasionally with companies and corporations, around leadership and group dynamics, and most recently I've been doing a lot around creativity. So as we recognize we're in a world that is ripe for change, there are a lot of opportunities for change, how do we train students and professionals and people in larger organizations with influence to do that in a way that is not just different from what we've been seeing, but also centered around people and doing the most good. So that's where I spend a lot of my time. I also do a good bit of writing, some entertainment criticism, some comedy. It is a bunch of different things. But it's been a really cool opportunity to bring that message and all of those different things to students, especially students who might not always have the opportunity to express those things, who might be taught that at any given point the path that they're going to take is just one thing. So I'll talk to them. I said, I am a person who does at any given point 12 things, and I'm doing fine. My parents are not worried. So being able to kind of offer that reassurance, but then give them tools to go forth and think not just in terms of success, but also impact, that's been something that's been hugely important. Fun fact, I always really like the beginning of Women's History Month because I get to start by celebrating it with my mom's birthday, and it's today. I already called her, so we're good. But she is one of my favorite women, so I like that the month starts with getting to celebrate her. Yeah.
So now that we've gotten the opportunity to know each other a little bit, I think it's important for us to just dive into the individual questions. And this is going to be a discussion format. I feel like this is a little formal for me. Maybe it's the organizer inside of me. But please feel free, if there's something that resonates with you, to add to it. And we'll have opportunity for Q&A afterwards from the audience. But this first question is for Amma. Like Amma described, she does so many things. Just from reading her bio, she's a comedian, she's a writer, she's a content creator. She develops her own website as well. She's an author, educator, the list goes on and on and on. And it's so great that she's here today with us and in our presence as well. But I think one of the questions that really, I think for Mu and myself, that really struck for us was that that huge list of things that you do, I think it really encompasses the phrase or the hashtag that we use a lot, Black Girls Magic, and a true definition of that. And my first question is, what does this phrase mean to you, and how do you apply it to your daily life?
So this is a big question, and I took a long time to think about it. And I think the best way that I can think to answer it actually is less about me and more about something that I saw and observed and felt late last year. So actually not too far from here, when Harvard gave out the Dubois medals, one of the medals went to Ava Duvernay, who, coming out with Wrinkle in Time, if you've not bought your tickets, please go do that. We need it. And they started her piece of the presentation with like a montage of her work and watching her direct people. And I cried for much of that montage. But for me, it was a little bit different than just kind of seeing something super impactful. I studied film in college, and I always used to joke that right after I left college, which was right when Netflix was first started, my entire queue looked like a 70-year-old man made it. Because everything I was watching for class was just things that 70-year-old men who were teaching my classes really liked, which in turn was stuff that other 70-year-old white guys made. I couldn't have dreamed of Ava DuVernay existing. And the fact that she was out there being somebody that now I could watch and say, that's somebody that looks like me doing something that I would love to do. I don't know when that's getting added to my list, but that was a hugely impactful moment for me as an adult. And I think being able to afford people that opportunity well earlier is a hugely important opportunity. And I know that there's an element of the Black Girl Magic concept that speaks around it being able to be in everybody, but I think there's also an element of it that makes it seem as though it's this mystical thing where it takes a superpower for a Black woman to be able to do something amazing. And I think if any number of the things that I'm doing, if somebody, a student that I talk to or someone who reads something that I wrote and resonates with it, feels like that thing is a little bit more accessible to them because of what I did, I think a big part of that magic is being able to spread that potential and that recognition that you could have that to somebody different. So that's what it means to me.
Thank you.
Okay, so this question is one that really resonates with me, and if you're Asian, there's a good chance that you might feel this way too. But this question is for Chrysanthemum. So the damages of the model minority myth is something that is not often discussed, but definitely and very largely felt in the Asian community. As an Asian American woman, what are some barriers you have encountered and how have you overcome them?
The funny answer is the Cambridge and Somerville exit was my biggest barrier today. It took 20 minutes to get off that highway, and that felt a little oppressive to me. I've also taken this exit 3 times in the past month. Oppressive each time. Are folks in the room familiar with the term model minority? If not, I'll explain it. The model minority myth is what we use as a concept to describe how Asian Americans, this includes people from East Asia, countries like China and Taiwan and Japan, Southeast Asia countries like the Philippines, Vietnam, Cambodia, and South Asia, including countries like India, Bangladesh, and Pakistan. Somehow all these people are going to be viewed as the ideal kind of minority or immigrant to the country of the United States. This is particularly used as a wedge against other communities of color, particularly Black communities. And so in place of that, I really hesitate to call the model minority myth a pure myth, because I think it has true tangible material effects on not just Asian people, but also other communities around us. When I think about what are the barriers that I've encountered, I know that they're not just because I'm just Asian American, or just because I'm just a Southeast Asian woman, or just because I'm a trans woman or the daughter of refugees. It's also intrinsically linked to my transness, my mental illness, my disabilities. All these things make up the facet and the palette of what I've had to overcome. And I don't think necessarily overcoming barriers is something that I'm always proud of, right? That for every person who overcomes the barrier, for everyone who breaks through the glass or bamboo ceiling, there's so many other people who are not breaking through. And within the Asian American model minority myth, I think it's really easy to see me and other Asian American women who are doing leftist political work as women who are doing some kind of work that is legendary, revolutionary, except the work that I am doing wouldn't be possible without Black and Indigenous women who have laid the steps before me. And I say that because women of color is a term that was coined by Black women during, I believe, the Women's Conference many decades ago. And when Black women were coming up with ways to organize themselves, non-Black women of color felt very marginalized and felt like, well, if white women are doing this, and if Black women are doing this, then where do we come in? And so really, it was Black women organizers who said, we'll make an intentional choice to unite as women of color. And this is a term that is going to obviously flatten all of our identities, but when used and deployed specifically, there is a potential for solidarity. And so I would love to talk about the Asian American model minority myth, but for myself, I don't really find that applicable anymore. I don't face barriers necessarily tied to my Asian identity in day-to-day life. Sure, I'll have the occasional slur, the occasional person who will bow at me or, like act as if I don't speak English, but the things that are more pressing to my community, the Asian American community, are issues of Islamophobia. Many Muslims are Asian, right? Police brutality affects Asian Americans, but also there are also Black people in the Asian community, right? So the Asian community is not separate from all these other women of color. We are all, there are a lot of things that we have to specify and be intentional about. And while the myth is one issue that, that Asian Americans face, it is not everything that we face either.
Thank you. And this question is for Sonia. I think that especially right now during this political climate, immigration is a huge topic. And I think it's very important that we speak about how immigration looks different from each country. My family is from El Salvador. It's gonna look different comparison. Yay, Salvadoreña! It's gonna look very different comparison to somebody that's Haitian American, for example. So Sonia, if you could please speak a little bit about your immigration experience, but also in relation to your creative work and how that's being used to really impact and reframe this narrative, but also very hateful narrative ascribed to undocumented Latinx.
So I actually found out that I was undocumented my last year of high school. Because it's basically the bridge of going from child to adult. That's where you need a driver's license, it's when you need to get a job, or you're thinking about it because all your friends are doing it. So I found out, and it's because, so my father told me, and at first I didn't believe him. I was like, papers? What do you mean? Like, what do you mean I need papers? I'm human. How does a paper define me? And it's not until I went to apply for a job, and I was actually trying to be really honest. I was really naive, and I was very honest with the person that was employing me. And I told them, and they said, I'm sorry, I don't know what to do. I can't do anything for you. And that was a moment of shock and realization, to kind of realize that people are really, valued through a piece of paper, through a security number. I am no longer undocumented because of, a privilege and access that I had to lawyers when I got to Harvard. But my freshman year, I had to find out what it meant to be illegal all over again. Like, what does it mean to be illegal in, in an Ivy League campus? Not being able to go to different countries, not being able to still get a job. I had professors that, put their foot on the line just so that I could work. And within all of that, and within seeing all of this, and looking at my parents' experiences and the hardships that they faced, of not just through not having the privilege of having papers, I realized very early on that narratives are very important, and that it's important for us as women of color, as people of color, as anything that is not portrayed in mainstream media, to really to create our own narratives. Because history is very important, and history is basically just somebody's perspective. But for some reason, we take it as, what reality is. And so by realizing that, I focused on really making my art about kind of reframing what it really meant to be an alien, an illegal alien. And because you see this whole other narrative that you only get to see, in the media and online and the news, and it gets tiring. Like, you get tired of being X, Y, or Z. And so that's why narratives are so important. Poetry, narratives, it's what makes, it's what creates the story of who we are. And so the first song that I published was also with another fellow undocumented classmate. He had recently lost his mother to cancer, and unfortunately he couldn't go back. So his mother went back to Mexico they thought they found a cure. And because he was undocumented, he thought at first, I shouldn't go back, because if I go back, I'm not gonna be able to come back. But then at the same time, that it was his mother. And he decided to leave. Unfortunately, a few days later, his mother ended up passing away, and he wasn't able to come back at first. But then through a miracle, it's not a miracle actually, it's a lawyer. Unfortunately, some people have access to lawyers and some people don't. And that is really what determines who gets convicted, who becomes a criminal, who ends up in prison. So it's important for us to realize that. Next time you look at a criminal and you think, this person's a bad person, rethink all over again, because it's just access to a lawyer or resources. So with that, I think just creating your own narrative is so important, and don't be afraid, don't be shy, especially with yourself. Just dig deep in there and just create.
Before we jump into the next question, thank you so much to the three of you for being really honest and just opening yourselves up to a group of strangers.
Thank you. So a follow-up question, and this is a group question. I think a lot of us would agree if white men were non-existent, we would just be a lot more happier. There would be a lot less issues in the world too.
I said that out loud several times.
Yeah. And I know we're being recorded live, so you can stream that again that live if you need to. But A group question that we did formulate, Mu and myself, was if we were to deport white people, let's say for 6 months to Mars, what kind of advances would be made in the US and what issues would be resolved? And this is for everybody.
Well, first, actually, I don't think we should deport them to Mars. I think I want to go to Mars. But it's really difficult because, well, okay, so if white people left, I think we would just have a homogenous base of, us. And if you see all the countries that don't really experience racism as much, it's because they're more homogenous. And so the thing is, we just have implicit bias. Like, white people are going to hire white people, black people are going to hire black people, brown people are going to hire brown people. It's the way we act because of the implicit bias that we have. So instead of deporting white people, I think the bigger challenge that we face is really just creating the connections and the conversations that are needed, not just to talk about race, but to also talk about class. Because let's face it, the people that are going to be going to Mars are probably like some of the richest people. So those conversations need to happen, and it's difficult a lot of the time because it's not on the same level of playing field, so the perspectives aren't, consumed equally, but it's still important to have those conversations. So, yeah.
I think one thing I'd like to see, and this can happen whether people are deported or not, although when I think about kind of the way like climate change and everything is happening, like can we go? Because nothing's happened over there. Like, I feel like if that's the situation, I just have to put that question out there. But I think that one element of that dynamic, and again, it speaks to race, it speaks to class, it speaks to any numbers of bias, is that there are a lot of inequities in terms of who's represented at higher levels. So I would like to see that even out, not just in government, but also in higher levels of corporations. One example, and it's kind of an offbeat example, so stay with me. I love commercials. I don't skip through them. I think they're fascinating. And I feel like honestly, 3 or 4 times a year, we'll see a commercial come out where it becomes a big thing because somebody made a mistake. So like the Pepsi ad with Kendall Jenner, the Dove ads that ended up getting made really popular for mistakes that were made. And a lot of the times when I talk to people about that, they will say, oh, well, no one was in the room to tell them that something was wrong. And my answer to that is always, maybe there was nobody in the room that was wrong, that could say that something was wrong, but it's also possible that somebody was in that room, voiced an objection, and that person's opinion was deemed unimportant. And either of those things are possible, likely, but one of those is a little bit worse, I think. So one thing that I would really like to see, if we had the opportunity to reset some balance, however we choose to do that, is getting people in positions of power and then teaching people how to value all of those opinions equally. So that's gonna speak to implicit bias as well, is if I'm objecting to something and nobody in that room looks like me, the people in that room need to know that I'm speaking up for a reason and I need to be heard. And how can we build that space in, again, as many different places as it's needed, in government, in entertainment, which we're seeing a little bit more of now because it's easier to talk about, in enterprise and business. How many different places does that conversation need to be having? And at the end of that 6 months, how do you maintain it?
So I want to preface this by saying that by imagining a world without whiteness, we are leaning into the impossible, right? We're imagining this, we're joking about this, but the concrete reality is that there will never be a world where whiteness does not exist or has not affected the way that our societies have been organized. To get rid of whiteness is to undo the last, how many millenniums, right? However, I think what this question highlights for me is that when whiteness is not in the conversation, when whiteness is not the center of conversations about race or about how communities of color interact with each other, then we can actually see how can we as an intra-community of people of color how can we actually start showing up for each other? How can we start healing the wounds that exist between our communities? Even within the Asian American community, look, not everybody who's Asian likes each other in the first place. So in a world without whiteness, we're still not gonna like each other, right? There are so many communities where white folks don't even, like have populations, and yet conflict is still there. And I think all I would love to see is in this imaginative world without whiteness, and it's already happening in communities that are not majority populated by white folks. I would love to see how different communities can begin and start engaging in conversations about how do we build an equitable world, because anti-blackness is universal, right? A world without whiteness does not mean a world without anti-blackness. And non-black people of color in a world without whiteness are still going to deploy anti-blackness. That's a conversation that I would love to further engage in this speculative world.
And I think that really segues well into our next question. And I agree with all three of you that whiteness is something that will always be a constant factor in our society. And if there's no whiteness, there's still some oppressive state that is going to separate our communities. But according to the Center for American Progress, women of color will make up 53% of the female population by 2050. That's not far off from now. And initially we asked, how can white people be good allies? But I also want to broaden that up to not just white people, but also communities of color. How can we be good allies to each other to ensure that we are wholly represented, we're working across communities, and that we have a seat at decision-making tables? And this is a question for the group, so.
I'll start because I spend a good bit of time with this in a very specific context. So because I've spent so long with students, specifically college students, I'm in the position to recommend or mentor or sponsor people fairly often. And it has been my strategy in the past several years is to give that help and prioritize that help for people who would not get it otherwise. So being able to put people up for things who are absolutely 100% qualified, but might not have that opportunity otherwise because they don't look the part or someone thinks they don't fit. And it helps to have somebody in a position of power say, this person can do the thing you're asking of them. This person can improve this organization for these reasons. Maybe not just because they fit, but because you have a gap and they know how to fill it. And that's equally as important. So for me, the big part of being able to, ally is the word that typically comes along with that, but I think a lot about being an accomplice to people who are struggling or activating situations where they can be helpful is figuring out who needs that help more. And that speaks less to kind of equal playing field and more to equity. Where does equity need to be restored and what part can I play in that?
I would say the biggest answer is just supporting local. That means local artists, local stores. I think a really great platform for this is Patreon. I don't know if you guys are familiar with it. Yeah, it's awesome. It basically gives anyone the ability to own their own ideas or services, and it gives you, the community, the ability to fund these ideas. Because it's something that we have to think about as consumers. Where are our dollars going? Who are we supporting? And through these platforms that now exist, we have the ability to really support our local groups, and then through that, through having like a platform of wealth and community wealth, then we can continue to build. But also connected to that, voting. Like, who are we voting for? Who are we putting in these spaces of power so that they can determine what our laws and our systems will look like? That is a really important question. And I really don't think that a lot of us engage with that thought very often, just because, politics, yeah, Trump is our president, woohoo, yay, nay. Yeah, like, it sucks, but at the same time, I don't think we are engaged as a community in local politics. And this is something that we really, really have to pay attention to. It's not about the president, it's about the people that are making the local laws. It's about, some names, Pat Jalen, Dave Rogers, like these people, city councilors, they have a voice in our community, and they work for us. Our taxes go to them. So I think a really powerful thing that we can do is run for some of these offices. If we do that, we get to write the laws.
Mu, would you mind saying the percentage again?
Yep, so it's 53% of the female population will be women of color by 2050.
53% only? And that's where, okay. So when we think about what 53% of women of color means, that doesn't actually say anything to me, because I am someone who values data disaggregation. And I say that as an important thing because the 47% of white women who are going to be there are still going to be there. But within the 53% of the women of color who are going to exist in the United States, we're all going to have specific different needs. And I think the best answer to ask, or the best question to ask for help is, what do you need? It's as simple as that, I think. Oftentimes, people who are doing work for other communities are missing that integral human connection, that first touch of, what's going on? Not assuming what different communities need, but asking, if you are someone who wants to rock with my community, if you do want to show up for women like me, if you do want to show up for women who look like me or sound like me, I don't necessarily need the assumptions of what you think I need. Because in fact, we can advocate for ourselves, which is what in fact what we're doing right now, is if you want to help a trans girl, ask her, what does she need? Oftentimes it's money, housing, food, access to education, a clean place to sleep in a warm bed. But what a lot of, I think, nonprofits and organizations that more largely help trans communities altogether, they're missing that fact that, like, in our day-to-day needs, a lot of trans women, particularly black and brown trans women, need just ways to live and survive without having their livelihoods threatened. So if you are interested in being an accomplice to communities of people who aren't like you, bridge that connection, be empathetic. Why are you wanting to help in the first place is a good interrogation for yourself, but then once you understand where your motivations are coming from, it's as simple as asking, what can I do for you?
So Chrysanthemum, Mu and I were able to look through your website, and your work is so beautiful, but also very deeply personal and just transparent and honest. And it would be perfect if we could just stream something live, because I know that you have YouTube videos as well. But how did you find your voice as an artist, as a poet, and how did you pick poetry as your platform?
So right now I'm 22 years old, and I didn't begin writing until I was 18, or more like 17 in fact. When I was a teenager, I only really did photography, and I think about the visual element as something that didn't require me to use my voice. In elementary school, I was put into speech therapy for my lisp, in case you haven't heard, but also for my stutter and different other speech impediments that my mouth makes. And I was very ashamed for my voice for such a long time. And one of my friends, None, she is a black trans woman, and I've talked to her about how, how am I in this art form where I have to use my voice, and yet I hate the sound of my voice. And she says, it's okay that your voice is clockable. It's okay that you don't sound like a cisgender woman. It's okay that you lisp. It's okay that you stutter, because for so long, those have been reasons why we didn't listen to certain communities, because they didn't have access to language or didn't speak the dominant language properly, right? And so as I gravitated from being a photographer, a visual artist, into a performance artist, I realized that what I wanted to use was language as a weapon. I wanted to use language as a specific way for me to advocate for my narratives, for my communities, for me to uncover my histories and to bring that into the mainstream. So I'm a touring artist, and I go to different colleges and I read poems in front of people for money. And it's a strange idea knowing that I can talk about my feelings for money in an artful way, right? Strange concept. And if anything, if you can speak, you can do that too. But all that is to really say is that I became a poet out of necessity, because it's how I used words to understand myself. I learned English as a second language. I'm the first among my family who went to college, and although I did drop out later, I find that by having access and the resources to learn about language carefully within the confines of a predominantly white institution, I'm able to gain the master's tools, so to speak. I'm able to use master's tools, and you know what? I think I can use it better than them. I think I can use language better than them. I think I can write better poetry than what I learned in high school. And the thing is, a lot of people are not told that what they have to say is valuable in the first place. For so long, I was so ashamed to use my voice. I was deeply afraid of public speaking. And you know what? I don't have the most beautiful voice. I sound like a frog stuck in a scene grinder, but that's fine with me, because this is how people who look like me speak. And this is the voice that I'm going to use when I advocate for myself to say that I deserve to live.
So you mentioned that you're using words as a tool, and I think everyone on this stage right now has a different form or different platform they use as a tool. And this question is for Sonia. How is your work rebranding and destigmatizing what it means to be both a cannabis user and also a person of color?
Well, I'm basically kind of doing the same thing that I've been doing for illegal aliens, except now I'm just doing it for weed. Because, both of them, I saw very huge parallels between immigration and weed and drugs and what exists in the US. So they're very similar for two reasons. They're both commodities, and they both have a very long history of being stigmatized. But while one becomes legal, weed, the other one remains illegal, people. Why? Well, because there is a direct benefit to using cannabis, weed, ganja, marijuana. You have an endocannabinoid system, and weed has cannabinoids. This means that when you consume weed, it actually helps you reach homeostasis. And weed does it better and actually more natural than when you use opioids. And unfortunately, this is something that a lot of people don't know. And while there's, an opioid epidemic, specifically here in Massachusetts, it's very important that we actually, do the research and are open to the data that tells us what actually is science. And so in the same way that I worked to, legalize people, now I'm working to destigmatize a plant and help people understand what this plant is, what it can do. Sometimes I have trouble with my parents. I still have trouble with my parents. When they realized that I was going to go into the cannabis industry, they looked at me crazy and they said, "What are you doing? Is this why you went to Harvard? So you could be El Chapo?" And I was like, first of all, Mom and Dad, wrong drug. Second of all, this is, it's a completely different substance, and there's a reason why it's been illegal for all of these years, since the 1930s, when Harry Anslinger made political moves because he was invested, I believe, in paper, and hemp was a very huge competitor to paper. So there's all of this historical reasons that were hidden from us. And it's now our job to kind of remove all the lies and come up with the truth. And how we do that is, again, through narratives and making sure that you share your stories as, as young people or as mothers, as older people. We need to share the relationship that we have, not just with, the plant, but also with immigration. The reason why immigration is still legal is because there's a huge benefit to companies not having to pay for, easy things like insurance, Medicare, anything that your employer usually pays for to take care of you. And that's why it becomes very convenient to have illegal aliens. So yes, that is, I don't know if I missed any part of that question. Thank you.
Okay, so the last individual question is for Amma. You're a strong believer in cultivating creativity, and for those of us who haven't read your work, what are some ways you encourage people who label themselves as not having a creative bone in their body, and how would you help them think outside of the box?
So I feel like there are two pieces to this. And one piece of that is to anybody who thinks that they're not a creative person or doesn't have the potential to do it, I say, look around you. Look at the world that you're living in. Odds are there's stuff that you're seeing that either doesn't work the way it should, or you think could work better, or maybe is leaving people out in a way that is damaging or destructive or disempowering. If you can notice those things, you're about 20% of the way to coming up with something new and different and that improves the lives of other people. So I would say keep your eyes open, look around you, consume as much as you can in terms of resources, read everything, and I'm not just saying that because I'm in a library. Although, honestly, I hadn't been here before tonight and I might not leave. It's beautiful here. But yeah, read everything. Read things that you love. Read things that people recommend to you. Read things that you don't think you'll like, because you will learn something about yourself and about that topic, whether you're really enjoying it or really struggling with it. So being in a position of noticing things, I think, is the first big part of being creative. And the second part I alluded to a little bit earlier, when I'm talking to students about kind of assessing their ideas and having enough information to decide if they should proceed with something, one quality that I like to ascribe to creative things that they should look for is heart. And by that I mean, if you have an idea that you want to put out into the world, I want you to ask 3 questions. Who could that idea help? Who could it possibly hurt? And how can you execute it in a way where you can maximize help and minimize hurt? And I ask that question with the idea and the understanding that it will be difficult for people, because a lot of times they'll be around people who will affirm their beliefs, and even really bad ideas will get executed. So if you're not talking to anybody that's challenging you, you have not sufficiently answered that question. So talk to people who could be impacted badly, and you have to hear why there's hurt and how you're going to approach that. So being able to understand both sides of that and rethink some things, maybe even start from scratch and burn it all down if that idea is going to hurt people, and think about not just having an idea. Anybody can have an idea, but having an idea that minimizes harm is a special thing. And I think that more people are capable of that if they're looking for that opportunity than possible. So if you're having trouble getting started, think about what you're seeing and where you could possibly see benefits, and then think about if there's something good that you can see coming from that. And then from there, it's however you choose to execute it. But those are the 2 most important things to me.
One last question, because it's Women's History Month, and tonight we celebrate the 3 of you on stage. What is one thing you want to be known for?
I guess this isn't something that I necessarily want to be known for, but I just want to give a quick shout out to Ayanna Pressley. please go support her because I want the world to be known for women like her.
So I think I have a silly answer and a more meaningful answer. My silly answer is inspired by something that I heard from somebody at a conference a couple weeks ago with a woman who's now running the conference who I worked with a couple years ago. And she brought back the idea that whenever we had meetings, and we did remote meetings because people were all over the country, they were very efficient and they ended on time and we got done what we needed to do. And she was like, you run a good meeting. I'm comfortable with that being on my headstone. She didn't mess around with meetings because everybody hates them and I work very hard to make them efficient. So I'm fully comfortable with that being it. But in a larger sense, I think that everything that I'm doing, whatever venue I'm choosing to do it in, it's with the goal of helping people grow. And whether that's working with students to learn something about themselves they didn't know when we started, or that's telling a joke that makes somebody think about something that they might not have thought about before. I want people to be better when I leave them than when they started. Some of that might be from having been a Girl Scout, but I like to think that's just who I am.
I'll be a little grim. I've thought about this a lot, and not in the framework of popularity or fame, but that if I were to die, if I were to be murdered, who would remember me? What would I be remembered for? And how much humanization would go into that process? A lot of people mark the beginning of the LGBTQ rights movement at a Stonewall Inn, where police officers raided the inn, and many of the bar patrons resisted and fought back against the police in order to ignite what is now considered the modern contemporary LGBTQ movement. Oftentimes, when we think about this story, we think of two women. We think of Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera, and we mythologize them as women who were somehow on the front lines of the Stonewall riots, and that they were the first ones to throw bricks. But if you look at history, if you look at the records, that wasn't true. Marsha didn't even say she didn't show up till hours later. Marsha was doing something else. But Marsha and Sylvia are not remembered for throwing the first brick. I don't want to be remembered for my accomplishments. I don't want to be remembered for all the good things. Because what Marsha and Sylvia did for Black and Latina trans women in New York is that they created homes. They created communities, sisterhoods, families, ways to tangibly allow their community to live another day. And when we reduce them to the single, action of throwing a brick at the police, that's a really beautiful fantasy, but it's not true. It's not true. What they did was they sweat. They worked so hard. They went hungry. They dealt with a lot of shit. And as we try to remember trans women and trans women of color who have died, I would at least want you all to not make martyrs of women like us, because when we die, we're not just the next match to ignite a political act. We're a loss of a life. There are people who are going to be affected by the fact that we're no longer here. And what I would like to be remembered for is that if you knew me, if you loved me, I would like you, if I died, to remember that you did love me and that I loved you too.
Thank you once again to our three speakers to being so vulnerable but also transparent in terms of your creative work and also what you do in terms of 9 to 5 and also sharing a piece of yourself with us as well. We do have time for some Q&A. We just asked it if you could please introduce yourselves first, your name, and to whatever question you'd like to direct, and I can come around and pass the microphone.
Hi, my name is Gina James, and my question is, what are some of the things that you hear white people saying that are quote unquote well-intentioned or maybe not quite, I don't like the word woke, but we'll just say woke enough. What are some examples of things that people have said that may enlighten some folks to not say?
I had things to say. Often when I walk into a space and they're, especially like young, white, queer, and trans people who have seen me on the internet, they take that as permission that because I've opened myself vulnerably in a public space, that they're entitled to my public space now. That even if I don't know you, James, you're still gonna ask for a hug, right? And I'm like, I don't know you, James. There are also times when it's a little bit less like that, and it's a lot of like, yes, queen, come, look at her slay. And I'm like, I really just, I don't know. I got out the bathroom and I walked here. Like, that wasn't just a grandiose, fabulous thing. And I think that adds to the mythologization of trans women and trans feminine people, is that, you know, like when I walk down the street, it's sad, but I hear two things. It's I either get catcalled or I either get, yes, queen. And both dehumanize me in very different ways. So sometimes these overly intentioned compliments that are like, yeah, I know you're a real woman, you're a real biological woman, yeah. And I'm like, can I have a two-piece and surprise? That's all I'm here for. That's all I'm here for.
So the well-intentioned compliment piece is one we could probably do a whole other panel for a good hour on. If any compliment that you or anybody you know or anybody you might have seen gives, then comes with for whatever way that in which that person identifies, you can keep it. We don't need it. No, thank you.
Give an example.
Yeah, so being well-spoken for being black, for being a good writer for being black, on dating sites, which are well documented to not work well for women of color, for being pretty or beautiful for your race, anything in that vein. That's damaging. Like, you think you're saying something good, no, you've canceled it right out. So anything that then you feel compelled to qualify with that, that's not a compliment. That's, you've talked a step too far, you probably should have just held it in to begin with.
I think it's not necessarily what you say, but more so what you don't say. I think it's very important to listen, because that's something that I think that, I mean, we all forget as human beings, but especially if you're really trying to connect and understand, you know, where somebody's coming from, listening will get you 10 times farther than speaking. Just because it gives me the ability to really tell you where I'm at, or, you know, just if I'm dealing with a lot of shit, it just gives me the ability to say, hold on, I really can't take your energy right now, because that happens sometimes. But also something that would really help is extending business opportunities or ownership opportunities, extending the trust. So I was at a UGMA meeting yesterday, and UGMA is an organization that's helping to create community wealth, specifically for people of color. And they described 3 things that really keep POC businesses from forming: the wealth gap, the credit gap, and the trust gap. And the trust gap, wealth gap is just what's generationally passed down to you. The credit gap is having access to financial institutions like banks and, you know, credit. As historically, people of color have gotten the short end of the stick just because of, again, the implicit bias and somebody subjectively creating your credit score. And then the trust gap, I feel like that's the one that all of us have the ability to have most access to. And it's just trusting that, you know, it's okay to share. That's basically it. So listening and trusting I think, two major components.
Thank you. Are there any more questions?
Hi. So my question's actually about men of color. So I'm Asian, Southeast Asian, and Black Caribbean mix. How do you navigate and deal with sort of men in your family or in your community not understanding the importance of or supporting your full potential in doing what you do?
Well, that's really common for me as well. My father. It's actually right behind you. I love you, Daddy. So, my dad has not always supported my dream right away, or other men of color. Well, first thing I would say is run away and create your own spot so that they can only visit you when you say it's okay. And then I would say, just don't listen to them. Listen to yourself and tell yourself that you can do it and that nobody's going to stop you, that there's going to be people that don't believe in you. And, you know, sometimes you yourself aren't going to believe in yourself because of the voices that you hear around you. So it's just important for you to realize that you're not crazy and that if you believe something and you feel it, just go for it. Don't listen to them.
Agreed.
Ditto.com. I'll speak about my own experiences with men of color. I'll specify that I'm talking about Asian American men who don't understand all of this. And oftentimes I think it's about, for me, trying to mediate how can I extend empathy to someone who doesn't understand what queerness and transness is because of generational transnational gaps, but also trying to understand that that's not my job to fix a man who won't reach his hand out for me. You know, like there are men in my life, there are men of color in my life who will step up for me because they've extended that empathy and they've also been able to realize that that by humanizing me and by understanding what we have in common, where our points of solidarity can be, there's something very useful in that. But if you're not ready to make that jump, I'm not going to jump with you. I have other things to do, such as my Netflix queue.
Hi, my name is Qianqi Huang, and I'm with Asian Women for Health. And my question for you all is, what do you think is the primary health concern for women of color? And what are the barriers? Being a woman of color, what are some of the barriers that you experience?
I think a big one that spans really all women, but it compounds with women of color, is being trusted to know your medical experience. In the sense that if I speak up and I say, I'm in a given amount of pain and this is happening, to be trusted that I know what I'm talking about as a patient when I say that. We have the high profile case of Serena Williams, who had a blood clot shortly after giving birth, was not listened to. And if you're not listening to Serena Williams, what chance do any of the rest of us have? I mean, really. So thinking about the fact that, and I don't know where in medical training this comes in, and I have friends who work in medical schools, but talking about the idea that patients need to be trusted when they're speaking up about what they know about, and I think that being able to do that counts for double or triple or quadruple anytime you're dealing with an additional identity that somebody wants to discount or has been trained to discount or has not been taught doesn't need to be discounted. So I think that's a huge general one, but that's the one that came to mind as soon as you said that. Trust that we know what we're talking about. We know our bodies.
Specifically for trans women of color and trans feminine people of color, I think the access is the hardest thing. That not all trans women need to medically transition or want or seek sex reassignment surgery or any other kind of surgeries. Oftentimes, what a lot of trans women do need is health checkups, primary care providers, access to insurance, being able to get health care in the first place beyond just the neighborhood community clinic, right? Like, there's so many, especially in New England when it's such a centralized area of medical help, right? There's so many doctors in Massachusetts, Doctorville over here. But like, how many of my sisters are going to go see those doctors, right? Because to see those doctors, you need to pay those doctors. But more importantly, I think within Asian American communities specifically, so my parents are refugees from Vietnam who they escaped after the Vietnam War, and my entire life as an adolescent, I could never identify what was up in my family. And it wasn't until I took a high school psychology class and I was like, oh, PTSD. But right, like that kind of word does not hold weight for people in my community. My dad actually just sent me a selfie of himself from the hospital, and he was like, I felt something was going on in my heart, so I went to the hospital. And I'm like, okay, Dad, are you okay? And he's like, yeah, I'm great. Actually, never been better according to the doctors, but I'm so stressed out. And to me, I can hear that and think, oh, maybe he had a panic attack or an anxiety attack. But that language doesn't necessarily hold weight. And so what I have to offer him is, what do I need for you to combat the stress in your life? And it's all about being able to reframe the medical institutions for specific communities, because my grandma does not know what's going on when she, files her Medicaid and stuff. That stuff is done for her from my parents. And so in order for us to really have a nuanced idea of what healthcare can look like, we really have to be able to assess what do specific communities need? Do we need a translator or an interpreter on hand? Do we need to be able to provide discounted medications? All these things are important to ask when we look at specific communities.
I don't really know how to answer this question because I have a huge distrust towards our pharmaceutical medical institutions. When I specifically look at the weed industry and who is a patient and who's a recreational user, a lot of the times the difference between those two is who has access to doctors, who has the ability to pay for a medical card, who has the knowledge of how to go through that process. So yeah, I'm not sure. I feel like there's just not enough, the medical world is not advancing fast enough to really take care of even things like birth control. Like one of my biggest fears is getting pregnant, and birth control for women today is not what it should be. I've had the Mirena, I've had the metal, the copper wire, and both of them are horrible. They have messed with me hormonally terribly. I'm just waiting for men to have access to the same thing, because I'm tired of taking it, I just don't know. I just don't believe that they have the systems that are advanced enough for us to actually benefit from them. And so for the most part, if it's not an emergency, I try to stay away from the doctor.
Thank you. We have time for one more question, but our speakers will be here for a couple of minutes afterwards.
Hi all, my name is Estefania, and I work in the tech industry here in Boston at a company that develops self-driving cars. So I was about to ask you a question about technology policy, but I feel like there's a more humble question that I want to present to you, which is that I don't know how to make friends with women of color, especially in Boston, because it's such a classist and discriminatory place. And I graduated from Wellesley just this past year, and obviously I went to an institution that had a lot of, very diverse women with diverse experiences and a broadly defined, fashion, and I still feel really alone here as a woman of color. So I was wondering if you had any ideas, maybe so I could create that kind of community or cure some of that loneliness that's derived from, you know, being someone who's pursuing their dreams. And my family's from Texas, so they're back there, and, you know, it's kind of hard and it sucks, and I feel really alone sometimes.
Come to events. Come to events and meet people that are working on their dreams just as much as you are, and that are looking for people like you to kind of build that dream together. Because as an entrepreneur, I can tell you that having friends is one of the hardest things, because if I'm not building with you, I can't be friends with you. And it sucks, but that's just really what it is. Like, time is very limited, as I'm sure you've experienced in your own life. And so if you are focused on creating and building, go to spaces where you will find those people. And through that, you know, it just becomes.
I'll also say that you don't necessarily need to confine that to in-person spaces. There's a lot of negative stuff that can be said about social media, and I would agree with all of those things. But I would also say that it can be a really good space to find like-minded people. So, and that doesn't even need to be people that are super far away. Some of the very good friends that I met in Boston, I saw a comment on a friend's thread, and I was like, I want to be friends with her. And then I just sent a message, and have done that a couple of times and had a lot of success and met some very cool people. So to go along with that, to the events, a lot of those events have online presence, whether it's through who's reserved something on Eventbrite or who's tweeting about it using the hashtag. Don't be shy for kind of popping in and saying hi.
Hi, my name is Ida Jonas, and my question is, what's your next step? What's the next thing you're going to tackle? Is it writing a film? Is it tackling the pharmaceutical companies? What do you think is next on your list?
I need to quit my day job is what I need to do. Right now I'm developing a book. I won't go into too much detail with other women poets, and it's weird to have my work published in a book, like a physical book, not Facebook, a book. You know, like, you know, I've written my statuses on Facebook, but to have my words in an actual book. Today I actually got my copy of an anthology that I'm printed in, and it was so weird for me to open up my book and like, oh my God, these words are mine, and here's my name. And I said that? Did I really say that? And all I really need to do now is know that I want to finish honing my craft as a writer, which is a lifelong pursuit. I want to continue touring schools around the country, or the world, or Mars. And more importantly, I really need to quit my day job. I really need to quit my day job because I spend 40 hours doing something that doesn't fulfill me. And if I can use those 40 hours to sleep, but also to do what I actually love, that makes life worth living for me.
So I'll say one step that I am waiting on information for. So I've done my part, and I have to wait on a bunch of other people to do their part. And actually, as I'm saying this, I don't think I've said it out loud before. I feel like I've texted it to people and typed it a couple times. So you're about to hear something pretty cool. So in addition to a lot of the other offbeat interests that I have, one thing I've always really liked is children's television. Even as an adult, I spend a lot of time watching it because I work at home during the day, so it's a nice thing to have in the background. And if I zone out, then I learn something, so everybody wins. And a couple years ago, one of my friends made me aware of the Sesame Writers' Room, which is a program that they have specifically to bring in writers from underrepresented populations. And it was sent to me, of course, with the you should apply, and then I didn't. And then it happened again, and they're like, you should apply, and I didn't. So this time I did. So I'll find out in May, I think, if I get to spend 8 weeks in the summer with people who write Sesame Street and Odd Squad, which is my favorite. And if anybody in here has kids who watch Odd Squad, it's the best. It's about math and you solve mysteries. It's so great. Doc McStuffins, but shows that are doing something really interesting to teach kids. And I feel like, especially thinking about what children's television looked like when I was young, super white. And now it's so interesting to see who's represented and how early kids are getting to be in on the idea that people around them are different and there's something to be learned from that. Being a part of that would be amazing. So I hope that in the 250 words they gave me, I conveyed that well enough to get the opportunity to be a part of it. But that is a thing that I've put out there. We will see what comes back in a couple months.
Okay, so I don't know if you guys could tell, but I'm really exhausted. So yesterday was the last day of public policy debates for the cannabis industry, which will determine what our regulations will look like. So my next step is summarizing this for the general public so that we understand what exactly passed. What does this mean? They're gonna be voting on this next week, and regulations will be finalized March 15th. So a lot of my focus will go into synthesizing a lot of this information that the government should be doing, but the government a lot of the times is very, very slow. So that is why nonprofits are great. They fill the gaps. It's a lot of work, but it's possible. And the other thing that I'm putting, so aside from that, I also want to help, I want to put a lot of my brain power into helping as many local people get licenses and people that deserve licenses that should be making money from the plant that have normally gone to jail. So that's one of my biggest goals. Social consumption and delivery will be available February of 2019, so I'm looking forward to that and creating as much information as possible so that I can best assist people that want to pursue those licenses and maybe pursue a license myself for a cafe, but everybody wants a cafe, so probably not gonna happen. And then the other thing that I really wanna commit my time to and my energy to is not just, business, but also EatMe.land, which is a cannabis femme art tech collective, which I'm so happy that I met you because I would love for you to be a part of it. But yes, this space is just for creators to get paid for the work that they do, because it's really, really hard being an artist and not being able, and having to work a day job and not being able to get paid for the narrative that you create and the ideas that you have. So the time will go into these 3 projects, and I hope you all can be a part of it. And you can look both of those up on Facebook. Facebook, it's Massachusetts Recreational Consumers Council, EatMe.land, and Instagram as well, MA Consumers and EatMe.land.
Hi, my name's Kate. Thank you for being here. I really love that some of you work with youth and college and high school youth. I work as an educator for high school youth of color, teaching film and poetry. And I guess one of what this panel has really inspired for me is how I love this discussion of narratives and representation, and specifically Chrysanthemum, what you said about finding value in voice. How do we as role models, right, and activists instill in youth, specifically youth of color, that art and activism are valuable, valid fields, right? When we're talking about not being paid as artists and things like that. How do we create those narratives for them so that art becomes, and activism becomes more of an option, I guess?
I guess for me, it's just seeing all the white boys do it. So Elon Musk. Elon Musk is a huge inspiration, as well as Tyler, the Creator. Just seeing that there is just, when you go to museums and you go to all of these other spaces and there is no women, there are no people of color, that's what drives me. Because that just represents a whole erasure of history. And that is what we need to help our children understand, that they are creators and that everything that how they interact in this world is all part of how they choose to create their world. And it's really hard to help people understand that, especially when a lot of their circumstances aren't under their control, especially when it's needs that are not under their control. But it's important for us to really remember that create.
It's
it's time to go, but we want to appreciate so much our amazing panel again for being so transparent and vulnerable with us, the Cambridge Public Library as well for providing this space, and particularly Zoe and Carrie for making this happen, the Friends of the Cambridge Public Library, and thank you all for coming out tonight as well. Thank you.